The city was always busy, full of cars, lights, and noise. Tall buildings rose high into the sky, blocking most of the view of stars. But above one of those tall towers, hidden from the rush of streets, there was a special place. It was a rooftop garden, green and alive, standing like a small piece of nature in the middle of steel and glass. David often came there after work. He was an engineer, quiet and thoughtful, who found peace among plants. While others hurried to restaurants or sat in crowded trains, David liked watering flowers, trimming small branches, and breathing fresh air. He thought of the garden as his second home. That evening, the air was warm, and the sun painted the sky in soft colors of orange and pink. David carried a small watering can and moved carefully between the rows of flowers. Bright roses, simple daisies, and small fruit plants grew in neat boxes. He bent down to touch the soil and smiled. "It's a good day," he whispered, as if the plants could hear him. But he was not alone. Across the garden, sitting quietly near a row of tall sunflowers, was Myra. She often came there too, though she never said much. At first, David thought she was just another visitor from the city, someone who liked silence the way he did. But soon he noticed something different about her. She moved with strange grace, her eyes studied every leaf and petal as if each one carried a secret. Her voice, when she spoke, had a soft tone, careful and curious. Myra was not from Earth. She was an alien researcher, though David did not know this yet. She studied human ways, their love for small things, their effort to keep beauty alive even in crowded cities. For her, the rooftop garden was like a window into the human heart. That evening, David glanced at her from across the garden. She was writing something in a small notebook, her eyes focused on a purple flower. He hesitated but then smiled politely. "Good evening," he said. Myra lifted her head, paused for a moment, and then returned the smile. "Good evening." Her accent was gentle, almost musical. David felt a quiet warmth from that small exchange. For a few minutes, silence returned. Only the sound of wind brushing through leaves filled the air. But David was not the type to ignore curiosity. He placed the watering can down and walked slowly toward her. "You come here often," he said kindly. Myra looked at him with calm eyes. "Yes. It is peaceful." "I agree," David nodded. "It feels different here. Almost like the city disappears when you stand among the flowers." Myra tilted her head, thinking carefully. Humans build towers so high, yet they still make space for small gardens. Why? The question surprised David. It sounded simple, but also deep. He looked at the flowers and then back at her. "Because we need it," he answered. "The city is busy, sometimes too heavy. Gardens remind us of life, of simple beauty. Even when we live in metal and glass, we don't want to forget the earth." Myra studied him, as if trying to understand not just his words but the feeling behind them. She nodded slowly. "It is beautiful. To grow beauty even when space is small." David chuckled softly. "Yes. That's exactly it." Something about her presence made him feel lighter. She was quiet, but not in a distant way. Instead, her silence carried interest, as if she was listening to the world more deeply than most people ever tried. The sun was sinking lower now, painting the clouds in deeper gold. David pointed toward the horizon. "The sunsets look best from here. Have you noticed?" Myra turned her gaze to the sky. For a moment, her usual careful expression softened, and her eyes shined with wonder. Yes. It feels endless. They stood there together, side by side, without needing many words. The city below hummed with traffic, lights began to shine, but up on the rooftop, time seemed to slow. David felt a small spark of curiosity growing in his heart. He wanted to know more about her, why she came every evening, what she thought about when she stared at flowers, and why her words carried such quiet depth. Myra, on her side, felt something too. She had studied humans for weeks, watched their ways in crowded streets and busy offices, but standing beside David in the rooftop garden felt different. It was not study anymore. It was something warm, something she could not yet name. As the last light of the sun disappeared, David picked up his watering can again. "I'll see you tomorrow, maybe," he asked gently. Myra hesitated for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Yes. Tomorrow." And with that, the rooftop garden became more than just a place of peace. It became the beginning of something new, something neither of them fully understood yet, but both already felt. The next evening, the rooftop garden welcomed David once again. The air smelled fresh after a light rain earlier in the day. Tiny drops still clung to the petals, shining like small jewels under the soft evening light. David walked slowly, carrying his tools. He had been thinking about yesterday's meeting with Myra. Her words, so simple yet so thoughtful, had stayed in his mind all night. When he reached the garden, he found her there already. Myra stood near a row of lilies, bending slightly as if studying their white petals with great care. She held her small notebook again, the same one she always carried, and her hand moved quickly across the page. David smiled. "Good evening," he said in his calm way. Myra looked up and gave him a soft nod. "Good evening." He set his watering can down, curious as ever. "You really like writing notes," he said with a small laugh. "Are you a student?" Myra paused, then gave a careful answer. "In a way. I study life. The way people care for it. The way beauty grows in strange places." Her words made David tilt his head. They sounded unusual, but they carried meaning. He liked that about her. Every sentence felt like a door to something deeper. "Well," David said as he bent to touch the soil near the plants, "gardens are good teachers. They show patience. You can't rush them. You water, you wait, and little by little, life grows." Myra watched him with interest. "You care for these flowers as if they are family." David smiled. "Maybe they are. They don't talk back, but they teach me things. And sometimes," he added with a playful glance, "they even listen." Myra's lips curved slightly, almost a laugh. It was small, but it made David's chest feel warm. After a moment, she asked, "Do many humans care this much for plants?" David thought for a while. "Not everyone. Some people are too busy, too tired. But many do, yes. We like to grow things. It makes us feel connected to something bigger. Even if the city is tall and noisy, a single flower can remind us of peace." Myra's eyes softened as she looked around. "It is unusual. My people, they build, they travel, they learn. But they do not keep gardens like this. They do not grow small beauty for its own sake." Her words carried quiet honesty, and though she tried to hide it, David could feel a trace of longing in her voice. He leaned against the edge of a planter box, curious. "Then why do you come here?" Myra hesitated. Her fingers brushed the edge of her notebook. She wanted to keep her truth hidden, but she also wanted to answer him. Finally, she said, because this place is different. It feels alive. And when I see you caring for it, I understand something about your kind. David blinked. Our kind, he repeated softly, almost amused. She quickly corrected herself. I mean, people. Humans. He didn't press further. Instead, he smiled gently. Well, if you want to learn about people, gardens are a good start. We don't just live in buildings. We also need green, quiet places. The wind moved between them, carrying the smell of wet soil and flowers. Myra closed her notebook and tucked it under her arm. For a moment, she simply watched David as he worked. He moved with calm hands, not rushing, not careless. Each plant received attention as if it was precious. Finally, she asked, "Why do you spend your evenings here, when you could be with friends?" David looked up, a little surprised. "This is where I want to be. My friends know I like quiet. I guess you could say the garden is my companion." And now, he glanced at her with a smile. "Now I have someone to talk to here." Myra felt something shift inside her chest. It was small, but it made her feel closer to him. She was used to observing from a distance, never being noticed, never being included. But David's words were simple, kind, and welcoming. As the sky turned deeper with shades of purple and blue, they walked slowly across the garden together. David showed her the small tomato plants, pointing out the green fruit that would soon ripen. Myra touched one carefully, almost in wonder. "It is like a small world," she whispered. "Yes," David agreed. "And we get to take care of it." They reached the edge of the rooftop where the city lights began to glow. Myra leaned slightly over the railing, her eyes wide as she looked at the endless rows of buildings. "It is strange," she said softly. "Humans build so high, yet still seek the sky." David stood beside her. "We always look up," he said. "It's just in us. Maybe because we believe there's always more to reach for." Myra turned her head, meeting his eyes. For a moment, silence hung between them, filled only by the distant hum of the city. Something unspoken passed in that look, something neither of them could name yet. The night deepened, and the stars began to appear faintly above the tall towers. David picked up his tools, preparing to leave. "Same time tomorrow?" he asked gently. Myra nodded. "Yes. Tomorrow." As he walked away, Myra held her notebook close, her thoughts racing. She had studied many humans before, but none had made her heart feel this way. David's words, his care for small things, his kindness, it all sparked something new inside her. And David, heading down the stairwell, felt the same spark. He wanted to know more about Myra. Who she was. What she thought. Why her presence made the garden feel brighter. Neither of them knew it yet, but curiosity had already begun to grow into something stronger. The rooftop garden had become their quiet meeting place. Every evening, after work and study, David and Myra found themselves there, surrounded by flowers, soft wind, and the glow of the setting sun. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between them slowly deepened. David noticed the change first. He had always loved the garden, but now it felt brighter when Myra was near. Her presence made the silence softer, her questions made his thoughts clearer, and her smiles, even small ones, stayed with him long after he left. But he kept those feelings hidden. One evening, David stood near the row of roses, trimming dry leaves carefully. Myra was sitting on the stone bench, writing notes as always. She lifted her head and asked, Why do you care so much for these flowers? David smiled, wiping his hands. Because they need someone to care. They can't move, can't speak, but they still give beauty. I think it's fair to give something back. Myra thought about his words for a moment. You give without asking. That's what love is, isn't it? David said softly, almost without thinking. Myra froze for a second, then looked away toward the horizon. The sun was dipping lower, painting the sky in gold and purple. She held her notebook tighter. His word love echoed inside her. Her people did not speak of love the way humans did. They valued knowledge, progress, and discovery. Feelings were private, sometimes even hidden. Yet here was David, speaking about love so openly, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. She wanted to ask him more, but she stayed quiet. David noticed her silence. He wondered if he had said too much. He often wanted to tell her how he felt, but fear held him back. What if she didn't feel the same? What if she thought his words were foolish? He cared too much about their fragile friendship to risk breaking it. The evening passed gently. Myra walked with him among the flowers, asking about each plant. David explained patiently, and she listened with deep interest. Sometimes their hands brushed when they leaned close to see a leaf, and each time David's heart jumped. He tried to hide it with a calm smile, but inside, a storm of quiet feelings grew stronger. Later, they stood near the railing, looking at the city below. Lights from windows sparkled like stars fallen to the ground. Your world is full of light, Myra whispered. David glanced at her. Sometimes it feels too bright. But up here, it's just right. Myra turned her eyes to him. For a brief moment, their gazes locked, and the world around them seemed to pause. David wanted to speak, to tell her the truth hidden in his heart, but the words stayed unspoken. He only smiled instead. Myra felt something stir inside her. She had studied many humans, but David was different. His kindness, his patience, his gentle care, it was more than curiosity now. It was warmth, something she had never expected to feel in the city. But she, too, kept it hidden. Her people had rules about bonds with humans. She worried about what might happen if she let her feelings show. So they both stayed silent, each carrying a secret. As the nights passed, the silence between them grew heavier, not uncomfortable, but full of unspoken meaning. Small moments became important. A shared laugh when a butterfly landed on Myra's hand. A quiet pause when David offered her a fresh blossom. A soft look exchanged during sunset. David's friend Mark once asked him why he spent so much time on the rooftop. David only smiled and said, "The garden needs me." He did not speak of Myra. He could not explain the feeling even if he tried. One evening, rain clouds gathered, and the city grew dark early. David found Myra already waiting on the bench, her notebook closed, her hands folded. She looked thoughtful. "You always come," she said gently. "And so do you," David answered. She gave a small smile. Maybe this place is no longer just a garden. David's heart skipped a beat. He wanted to ask what she meant, but before he could, the first drops of rain began to fall. They hurried under the small shelter near the stairwell, laughing as the rain poured around them. For the first time, Myra laughed freely, not just a small smile but a clear, bright laugh. David watched her, and in that moment, he knew he was falling in love. But still, he kept the words hidden. As the rain softened and the sky grew darker, they stepped out again. Water sparkled on the flowers, shining like glass beads. Myra reached out and touched a rose petal, wet and glowing under the rooftop lights. "This garden," she whispered, "feels alive because you are here." David looked at her in surprise, but before he could reply, she turned away, hiding her own feelings. The night ended with soft silence, but in both their hearts, something unspoken grew stronger. Feelings were blooming hidden, but alive, like seeds waiting for the right moment to rise. The city was alive with excitement. Lanterns of every color hung across streets, and rooftops glowed with strings of lights. Once a year, people celebrated the Lantern Festival, when the whole city turned into a sea of floating light. Families, friends, and neighbors gathered on rooftops to watch lanterns rise into the sky, carrying wishes for the future. David had always loved the festival, but this year felt different. He wanted to share it with Myra. The thought of watching the sky filled with glowing lanterns, standing beside her in the rooftop garden, made his heart beat faster. That evening, David reached the garden earlier than usual. He placed a small basket on the stone bench. Inside were 2 paper lanterns, folded neatly. He had bought them from a street vendor, thinking it would be nice to share the tradition with her. When Myra arrived, her eyes widened at the sight of lanterns floating across the city. Hundreds of small lights already drifted upward, painting the night sky with warm colors. "What is happening?" she asked softly, her voice full of wonder. David smiled. "It's the Lantern Festival. Once a year, people light lanterns and let them rise. Each lantern carries a wish or a hope." Myra stepped closer to the railing, watching in amazement. "It is beautiful. Like stars leaving the ground." David nodded. "Exactly. People say the lanterns carry their dreams to the sky." For a while, they stood together, quietly watching the city glow. Myra's eyes reflected the floating lights, and David found himself watching her more than the sky. After a moment, he picked up the basket and held out one of the folded lanterns. "I brought these. Would you like to try?" Myra looked at it with curiosity, touching the thin paper gently. "It is so delicate," she whispered. David showed her how to open it carefully, how to place the small candle inside. She followed his instructions, her fingers moving slowly but with care. When they lit the candle, the lantern began to glow softly. Myra's face lit up too, her eyes wide with childlike wonder. "It feels alive," she said. David laughed gently. "That's what makes it special. Now, when it rises, you can make a wish." Myra hesitated. "A wish?" "Yes. Something you hope for. Something you dream of." She held the lantern in both hands, thinking deeply. David didn't ask what her wish was. He only helped her guide the lantern upward. Slowly, the glowing paper lifted into the air, joining the river of light flowing across the sky. Myra watched it until it disappeared among the stars. "What did you wish for?" David asked softly. She shook her head with a small smile. "If I tell, maybe it will not come true." He chuckled. "Fair enough." Then it was David's turn. He lit his lantern, holding it steady as the flame grew brighter. He closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of Myra, thinking of the quiet bond that had grown between them. He wished for courage, the courage to speak what was hidden in his heart. Together, they let the second lantern rise. Their fingers brushed as they released it, and David felt a spark run through him. Myra felt it too, though she did not show it. As the lantern floated upward, Myra asked softly, "Why do humans make such traditions?" David thought for a moment. Because we like to hope. Life is not always easy, but things like this remind us that dreams matter. Even if we don't know what tomorrow will bring, we keep wishing. Myra looked at him quietly. His words touched something deep inside her. Her people valued progress, but hope, simple, personal hope, was not something they often celebrated. She realized she was learning not just about humans, but about the human heart. Music from the festival below drifted up faintly, mixed with laughter and voices. But on the rooftop, it was just the two of them, sharing a quiet world of lanterns and light. David turned to her. "Thank you for being here with me tonight. It wouldn't feel the same without you." Myra's heart stirred. She wanted to say the same, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she whispered, "I am glad I came." The sky above them was now filled with lanterns, glowing like moving stars. The city seemed softer, almost magical. For a moment, Myra forgot her worries about rules, about her people, about differences between worlds. She only felt the warmth of standing beside David, watching light rise into the night. David, too, felt the moment deeply. He wanted to reach for her hand, to tell her how much her presence meant, but once again, fear held him back. He chose instead to stand close, letting silence carry what words could not. As the last lanterns lifted higher, Myra turned to him and said quietly, "You humans, you carry light into the sky. I think that is why your world feels alive." David smiled, his eyes meeting hers. "And maybe," he said softly, "that's why you're here with me." Neither of them spoke after that. They didn't need to. The festival had already given them something more than wishes. It had given them a shared memory, a night of light and unspoken closeness that would stay in their hearts. The rooftop garden had always been a place of peace. But one evening, that peace was broken. It began quietly. A warm wind swept across the city, carrying dry air from the south. The plants on the rooftop had been thirsty for days, and David planned to bring extra water that night. He climbed the stairs with his usual tools, thinking only of Myra and the calm evening they would share. When he opened the rooftop door, he smelled something sharp in the air. Smoke. His eyes widened. At the far end of the garden, a small fire had started. Sparks flickered along the wooden planter boxes where the soil had grown dry. Thin flames licked the edges of leaves, and smoke curled upward toward the darkening sky. "Myra!" David shouted, running forward. She was already there, standing near the flames with her notebook dropped on the ground. Her eyes were wide, not with fear but with quick thought. She had seen how the fire had begun. A loose wire from the rooftop lights had sparked, falling onto the dry soil. The plants, so gentle and green, now crackled in orange flame. David grabbed the watering can and rushed to pour it over the nearest box. The flames hissed and shrank, but more fire spread along the edge. His heart pounded. He had cared for this garden for years. The thought of losing it made his chest ache. Myra stepped closer. "It is spreading fast," she said firmly. "I know." David coughed through the smoke. "We need more water." But the rooftop hose was far on the other side, and the fire was already moving too quickly. David pulled off his jacket, beating at the flames, trying to keep them small. His arms stung from the heat, but he refused to stop. Then Myra moved forward. She raised her hands over the soil. Her people had knowledge of energy, of balance between elements, and though she had never shown it to a human before, she could not stand by now. With a calm focus, she bent down and touched the ground near the fire. The air shifted. The flames, while a moment before, began to weaken as if pressed down by an unseen force. The smoke lifted higher, spreading away from them. David stared in shock. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice rough from the smoke. Myra didn't answer. She pressed her hand harder against the soil, her eyes steady, and the flames flickered lower. It wasn't gone, but it gave David enough time to fetch the hose and spray water across the boxes. Together, they fought the fire, David with water and grit, Myra with quiet strength that she had never revealed before. Minutes passed like hours, until at last the flames shrank into thin smoke and blackened soil. The rooftop garden was not destroyed, but several plants were gone, their leaves turned to ash. The once bright roses and daisies stood dark and broken in one corner. David dropped the hose, breathing hard. His clothes were wet, his face streaked with sweat and ash. He turned to Myra, who stood silently, her hands trembling slightly from the effort. "You saved it," he whispered. Myra looked away. "Not all of it." "But most of it," David said firmly. He stepped closer, his eyes full of gratitude. "If you hadn't been here, I don't know what would have happened." For a long moment, silence lay between them. The city below still shone with its usual lights, but up on the rooftop, the world felt changed. The garden had faced its first danger, and together, they had fought to protect it. David's heart was pounding, but not just from the fire. In the middle of the struggle, he had realized something: he couldn't keep his feelings hidden anymore. The thought of losing the garden had hurt him, but the thought of losing Myra had been unbearable. He wanted to speak, to tell her everything, but she stood stiff, her face unreadable. She feared what he had seen. Her secret strength was not something she was supposed to reveal. She worried he would question her, pull away, or even fear her. But David didn't ask. He didn't demand answers. He only looked at her with deep honesty. "Myra, thank you." His voice carried more than gratitude. It carried the truth of his heart, unspoken but strong. Myra felt it, and her chest tightened. She bent down to pick up her notebook from the ground, her fingers brushing the soot on its cover. "The garden will grow again," she said softly. "Yes," David agreed, looking at the burned corner of the rooftop. "We'll make it grow again. Together." Myra turned her head, meeting his eyes. She saw no fear there, only warmth. And in that moment, standing among smoke and broken plants, she felt something stronger than before. The fire had burned part of the garden, but it had also lit something in their hearts, something neither of them could hide much longer. The rooftop garden was quiet the next evening. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air, and patches of black soil marked the places where the fire had burned. Some plants stood tall, still green and alive, while others were nothing but ash. David arrived early. He carried fresh soil and small new seeds in his bag, determined to begin the work of repair. But as he stepped onto the rooftop, he felt a heaviness in his chest. The fire had shaken him, not only because of the damage, but because of Myra. He could not forget the way she had stood in the smoke, calm and steady, pressing her hand against the ground as if she carried a hidden power. He had questions, but stronger than his questions was the feeling in his heart, the clear knowledge that he cared for her deeply, more than words had ever said. Myra was already there, standing near the burned corner. She looked at the soil with quiet eyes, her notebook pressed against her chest. David set down his bag and walked over. "You came early," he said gently. Myra nodded without turning. "I wanted to see the garden before we start again." He followed her gaze. It's hurt, yes. But not lost. We'll plant again. It will bloom. Her lips curved in a faint smile. You always believe in new beginnings. Because I have to, David said softly. Then, after a pause, he added, and because I believe in you too. Myra's eyes flicked toward him. The way he said it carried weight, not just kindness. She felt her heart tighten. For a few minutes, they worked side by side in silence. David poured fresh soil into one of the empty boxes, while Myra gently placed seeds in another. The sun dipped lower, washing the sky in shades of gold. The city lights began to glow. Finally, David set down his tools. His hands trembled slightly. He had fought with himself for days, holding back the words that pressed against his chest. But after the fire, after the fear of losing everything, he knew he could not stay silent. Myra, he said, his voice steady but quiet. She looked up, her dark eyes calm. Yes. I need to tell you something. He took a breath, his heart beating fast. These evenings with you, they've become the most important part of my life. The garden was always special, but now, when you're here, it feels alive in a new way. I find myself thinking about you, waiting for the moment I can see you again. What I'm trying to say is, I care about you. More than just as a friend. The words hung in the air, heavy and honest. Myra's hands stilled over the soil. She lowered her gaze, her thoughts rushing. She had known this moment might come. She had felt the same growing warmth in her heart, but she had also feared it. Her people had rules, boundaries about bonding with humans. She had kept her feelings hidden because of that. Yet now, looking at David, his face open and sincere, she realized she could not hide anymore. Slowly, she lifted her eyes. David, she said softly, you speak with such honesty. I did not expect to feel the same. But I do. When I am here with you, I feel peace. I feel warmth. I feel something my people do not name, but you call love. David's breath caught. For a moment, he could not move. Then he smiled, not with excitement, but with deep relief. You feel it too? Myra nodded. Her voice was steady, but her eyes shone. Yes. I was afraid. Afraid of our differences, afraid of what it might mean. But last night, when the fire burned, I realized something. I was not afraid of the flames. I was afraid of losing this, of losing you. David's chest filled with a warmth he had never known. He reached out, slowly, carefully, and placed his hand over hers. You won't lose me, he whispered. For a moment, they stood together, hand in hand, as the wind moved gently through the rooftop. The garden around them, though damaged, seemed to hold a quiet promise of new life. Myra's voice was soft, almost like a secret. Then we will grow this garden again. And maybe, we will grow something between us too. David nodded, his smile gentle. Yes. Together. The city below was alive with lights, but up on the rooftop, there was only the soft glow of two hearts finally speaking the truth. The fire had scarred the garden, yet it had also cleared space for new beginnings, beginnings rooted not only in soil, but in love. The sun rose gently over the city, painting the skyline in soft orange and pink. On the rooftop garden, David and Myra began their work early. The fire had left scars on the soil, and many plants had been lost, but their determination was stronger than the past damage. David carried boxes of fresh soil, while Myra carefully unpacked tiny seedlings. The garden was quiet except for the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of city traffic. They moved together, naturally and easily, without the need for many words. "Look at these," David said, pointing to small tomato plants. "They survived the fire. They are ready to grow again." Myra knelt down to inspect them. "They are strong, like the garden itself," she said softly. David smiled, brushing a wet leaf from his sleeve. "Yes, strong and full of life. Just like some people I know." Myra's eyes lifted to his, and she smiled, a warmth spreading across her chest. David had said it carefully, but she understood. They shared a quiet laugh, the first of many that day, as they planted seeds and watered the soil. Hours passed, and little by little, the rooftop began to bloom again. Bright daisies, colorful tulips, and young shrubs took their place. Myra brought something new, a small tray of alien plants from her world. Their leaves shimmered faintly in colors David had never seen before. "They are safe here?" he asked, touching one of the leaves carefully. "Yes," Myra replied. "They need care, like your flowers. But they can grow with yours. It is a mix of two worlds." David laughed softly. "Then this garden will be special. A place where two worlds meet." Myra smiled at him. For a moment, her thoughts drifted. The city below, the fire, the past weeks, they had all led to this. She realized the garden was not just a place of plants. It was the place where her heart had found something unexpected: love. As the afternoon sun warmed the garden, David and Myra paused to rest. They leaned against the railing, looking at the city skyline. The towers were tall, but here, on the rooftop, the world felt gentle. "You know," David said quietly, "I think this garden teaches more than just patience. It teaches hope. Even after fire, even after damage, life can begin again." Myra looked at him, her eyes soft. "And love too," she said. "It grows slowly, like a plant, with care and attention. You cannot force it. But when it blooms, it is beautiful." David reached out and held her hand gently. "Then let us grow both love and the garden together." Myra nodded, a quiet happiness shining in her eyes. "Together," she repeated. Days passed, and the rooftop slowly returned to its former beauty. Neighbors began to notice the garden again, admiring the bright flowers and healthy green plants. Some came to offer help, and David and Myra welcomed them with smiles. But their favorite moments remained quiet evenings, when the city lights twinkled below and the garden smelled of earth and flowers. They would walk slowly among the plants, share soft conversation, and sometimes just stand in silence, hand in hand, watching the sky. One evening, as the sun set, Myra brought a new idea. She placed a small alien flower in a planter beside a human rose. "Now both worlds grow together," she said softly. David knelt beside it, touching the petals. "It is perfect. And so are we." Myra laughed softly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Yes. Stronger because we care for each other, like we care for the garden." They stood together, looking out over the city. The wind whispered through the leaves, carrying the scent of blooms and fresh soil. The rooftop garden, once scarred by fire, was now more alive than ever, a symbol of life, hope, and love that could survive anything. David squeezed Myra's hand gently. "We faced fire, danger, and fear. And still, here we are. Together." Myra leaned slightly against him, her head close to his shoulder. Yes, she said softly. Together, always. The garden glowed under the golden light of the setting sun. Flowers swayed gently, new buds stretched toward the sky, and tiny alien leaves shimmered softly in the evening air. Everything was alive, everything was growing, and everything felt right. The fire that once threatened to destroy the rooftop had become a memory of a beginning. A beginning of courage, of trust, and most of all, of love. As night fell and the city lights shone like stars below, David and Myra stood hand in hand among the flowers. The rooftop garden had bloomed again. And so had their hearts. For the first time, they did not need to hide or fear. Together, they had created a place of life, a place of hope, and a place where love could grow endlessly, just like the flowers around them.